So yeah, let's talk about your background and what led you into AI or sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, kind of, I feel like a lot of startup individuals is kind of ebb and flowed. And so right out of college, I went to school, got a general degree. It was a Bachelor of Fine Arts, business minors, marketing, things like that. Wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Got involved with a consulting company. And long story short, after less than a year, I was like, this isn't, the path for me. Suit and tie, traveling around, working that 9 to 5. And so I jumped into the entrepreneurship world, started a small business, and that in itself was basically dipping my toe in the world of sustainability. So the company was basically a clothing brand that also occupied other items or clothing company purchases, things like that were all sustainable or tied to some sort of impact. And from there on, it just went headfirst into the social impact and business landscape. So at some point in time, after doing that for a number of years, I started a small drone company, was involved with a few other different startups. But I took a step back at one point and I was like, I need to be part of something larger. I need to have more impact and more scalability with the work that I'm doing. Enter technology. So at that point in time, I decided to go back to school, found my way out to Colorado, where I got a master's at the University of Colorado Boulder in essentially emerging ethical technologies, focusing specifically on artificial intelligence, the scalability of it, the use cases, how to really optimize and make workflows more efficient and effective, while also leaning into the social impact realm of things. And from there on, it just kind of haven't stopped going that direction. So involved with some both nonprofit, but also a number of other startups. And then the most recent one was after my PhD research kind of took hold, was the Koru business venture, which we recently just got acquired. And that was basically tying it all together: corporate sustainability, artificial intelligence, all in a big old engine that powers the mission that we're trying to push forward with.
Let's talk through your PhD research. And, one of the theories I have and what I'm building out and trying to understand is, the impact AI is going to have on the workplace. Is it going to be cheaper? Are we going to be able to save, be more maximize efficiency? But one of the questions I have is, how impactful is it going to be on their digital footprint as far as waste and energy consumption? If you have any idea on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe the blanket statement of artificial intelligence in itself will maximize the efficiency and effectiveness of just about any industry, by and large. I think that's a pretty accurate statement. But as it comes to energy efficiency and waste, and as I actually just on a great call with a waste reduction company that's using artificial intelligence, so pretty timely here, it has tremendous potential. So for example, this particular company, just a perfect use case, they created a camera system with a monitor and a scale that essentially uses computer vision, a subset of AI, to analyze food that's going in the garbage. And then you can create automated reports to show essentially how much food you're throwing out and how to therefore reduce that. Similarly to, electricity or water, that's another big one, is you can put certain sensors, IoT devices, or other little ways to basically track and collate data, and then put artificial intelligence on top of that and say, can we extrapolate trends, learning, insights, and then take that information and then say, how can we move forward with this and create a more frictionless or a more efficient or effective solution, or our normal way of working from there on. And so the use case of artificial intelligence, from by and large, is being able to have someone monitoring data, monitoring activity, monitoring basically everything that you are working with your workflows, your technology, your sensors, 100% of the time, 24/7, 365. And that has tremendous potential, because originally it was an individual looking at this, checking in on different things. And so as it pertains to electricity, waste management, but also, water consumption or any other miscellaneous aspects in the sustainability space, AI is just a complete game changer from that perspective.
Very interesting. And so, my thesis that I'm working on is, AI being able to reduce waste by about 30%, not waste in the sense of consumption, but more of waste and time management, waste and lack of efficiency through human error. And, one of the ideas I thought was you'd be able to minimize your expenses. And, I think you're validating a lot of what I was thinking through in the reverse. So I think I was under the impression that AI would be able to eliminate about 30% of jobs. So, if you're working 40 hours, you'd be able to reduce that workload by 30%.
Hmm.
And but what I've come to realize is that it's going to open up a lot of different industries. And so what you just mentioned, the Internet of Things and all these different sensors that are going to be created, which will then require jobs from that. So it's pretty interesting what you're talking through.
Yeah, and it kind of goes along with the big picture question. I'm actually I recommend it if you haven't read The Singularity is Near Earth by Ray Kurzweil, one of the lead thinkers on artificial intelligence. And he basically is making the case for what AI and this technology will mean for humanity at large from a big picture perspective. But then he goes into individual little use cases and technologies and uses the example of if one of us went back to, say, the 1950s, but we still had the technology of our iPhone available, the internet, the calculators, the translation capabilities, we'd look like a super genius, right? But that technology is now ubiquitous and it's obtainable and owned by just about everybody, basically who has access to the internet in today's day and age. And by taking that mentality, we can now create these, superhumans to some degree that have the ability to increase their workflows, to do things quicker, to summarize large data sets, quicker, to take analysis of these different ones, and basically create kind of AI-driven functionalities that we as humans are doing. And so I think that's a really interesting concept to think about because a normal workflow is, a 9 to 5 doing this and that, but I'd argue my output with, LLMs and the tech that we've built out is actually much larger than what I could do just even 5 or 10 years ago. And it's that mentality that's going to reduce the inefficiencies and ineffectiveness of the workforce and therefore create more output and have a stronger company projection, I think, when you're really capitalizing using these technologies effectively.
One of the topics I wanted to ask you about is going through ethical technology. What is it? And, how is it going to impact technology moving forward?
Yeah, that's something I'm really passionate about, and it's a huge can of worms that's really difficult to kind of like open up and speak about because the concept of technology in itself and innovation and development is faster, quicker, stronger, more impact, whatever you can do and put on it. But there's just the rhetoric around it is how can we move from A to B as quick as possible? The issue with that is you forget to include often, certain checklists or frameworks or individuals that maybe have some sort of negative ramifications from this technology or lack of data or access and things like that that aren't part of the status target for these technologies. And you can go from everywhere from, the Googles to the Facebooks to all these different companies have had some sort of backlash in the ethical technology space because they're ostracizing, they're forgetting about, they're putting some sort of negative effect on some population. And the issue a lot of research has shown is that these companies have these checklists that, say you have to ensure that you're talking to the right stakeholders, you have to ensure that you're not being biased with your developments, you have to do this and that. But from a cost perspective, those don't create revenue, those don't create new products that you can sell. That's almost a barrier to get something to market quicker, which is actually the opposite of what a lot of these tech businesses are trying to create. And so it's creating that the concept that these need to be inherently designed with this bias in place, which is concepts to how do we make this the safeguards on this technology? How do we ensure that we're developing this for all populations or all groups, and it's not going to unintentionally segregate different populations? But that in itself has been around for many, many years. So this isn't a new argument. There's cases where, long ago in New York, there was bridges that were designed extremely low so that only families with their own personal cars can get to the beaches, whereas people who are taking public transport on buses, they couldn't go those routes to the beaches. So already secluding and excluding certain populations. And now we're just designing technology with those guardrails in place. So my thesis and the push that I'm really trying to talk about is you just need to think about all different populations, all demographics that might be affected by your technology, by your solution, by what you're putting out there, ensuring that all the stakeholders are in the room to ask the questions primarily before actually going to market or pushing up those updates that could have those negative ramifications.
That is a probably 2-hour podcast in it of itself, the ethical part of the AI.
Yep,
One of the
absolutely.
one of the ideas I was thinking through was at the ethical considerations as, if I just mention it as an example, I can see your thoughts on it. if you reduce the workload by 30%, how ethical would it be to just give someone 30% more work because they found a way to do it faster? I don't know if that's a part of your studies.
Yeah, so I actually have a couple interesting stories about this. One is, so my PhD in itself. I got into, let's not call it an argument for podcast sake, but it was a friendly conversation taken from an academic perspective where, PhD in itself has always, thought to take anywhere between 4 to 6 years. You need to do the research, you need to create your lit review, you need to defend your prospectus, then go out and write your large dissertation. And this concept was started many, many years ago, where you'd have to go to libraries and check out books and have things delivered in. And so my, 2021 PhD that I started, I was saying, I want to do this in a year and a half because I have access to resources. I have the ability to pull in any bit of information, to talk to people anywhere in the world instantly. So why am I constrained by this long 4 to 5 year timeline that is antiquated because of all these rules that were set by individuals that didn't have access to the connectivity or technology? And I was pushed back pretty strongly to say lately. And so it's that very same concept where in the workforce, like I taught a class actually on the future of work, and there's two different camps. One is you can have your output that you need to create. And if I, as an individual, am 20% more effective, that means I can get there quicker, which means I have to work 20% less. Or there's the workaholic individuals. That means in that time frame, I can actually create 120% of output because I'm actually working more effectively and still doing that time frame. And so you're going to start to see a little bit larger gap, that individuals who are saying, this is actually nice for me. I don't have to work as long, but I can still do as much work. And that's completely fine. But then the other side of the camp is going to be, I can do more work in a shorter period of time, which means in a normal, quote unquote, normal period of time, I can actually have more work. There's not a right or wrong answer. There's the conversation about what employers should, seek, whether that will reduce the workforce to working 4 days in a week versus the 5 because the output's the same, or if there's going to be increase in output because the requirements is needed and that's just the status quo. There's all these questions being asked still, but there's not one way of doing it now at this point in time because the technological advancements are so rapidly approaching us. But that's kind of the fun in being in the space from that perspective.
I think some of the challenges that are going to be faced is regulation and creating laws, and how fast the AI and the technology is moving and how slow the laws move. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you think that's going to impact the workforce?
Yeah, it's another kind of tricky one too, where you think about, Meta, for example. They have the ability to infiltrate and influence populations much wider, quicker, and on a much more massive scale than any governmental agency. Instantly, a push of an update, a new feature or functionality. And so that sort of concept is extremely intimidating to governmental agencies, I think. And the ramifications of what we're seeing are all these politicians and individuals kind of not knowing what to do, where they're running around saying, what's the best path forward? How do we create mandates? How do we create a law around something that is potentially going to change in, 10, 12, 18 months time? And those are really difficult to do. And so as it pertains to the workforce, I think we're going to see a lot of flexibility in actual regulations and mandates around businesses, meaning they're not going to have the constraints of you need to hit certain hours, or the part-time versus full-time hours is going to be a little bit more fluid based off industry. These will all take a lot of work kind of figuring those numbers out because there's going to be so much more gray areas versus, hey, 12 hours equals this much output. But instead, it's depending on your industry, depending on what space you're in, even your geographic location will affect that. And right now, we just don't have the answer to it. But once again, back to the ethical development side of things, we're going to need to put both the software engineers as well as the individuals overseas, as well as the politicians and the business owners all in the same room, which they're trying to do, but have them kind of hash it out and figure out the best path forward, so that we're kind of thinking about this from like the reverse perspective of where we want to get and how do we ensure that we're getting there that doesn't ostracize or unfairly affect anyone in the way.
It's such an interesting topic. And, we could just dive into the ethical. I have one more question on the ethical technology. I deal more with the data. I understand the bias in the data. I understand the influence that you can have in the data and how important it is to have a data set that incorporates every group. It could impact the health of, providing better care sooner. And, what are any ethical considerations in gathering the data or having bias in that data and, using it for any type of technology?
I think you just have to be careful about data in general from the perspective of what you're gathering, who you're gathering it from, and ensuring that you're transparent and open about that this data maybe isn't comprehensive. Because in the PhD master space, you read so many different articles published, and you read the fine print of, hey, this was collected through a data set of 24 individuals over a 4-year period of time, or 100 people, and you start to look at it, you're like, that's not even a percentage of a percentage of a percentage of the population at large. So how can you deduce these conclusions based off that? And the issue with technology is you're oftentimes creating tech in a way that's not taking the full ecosystem of population into account. And so once again, I think there's going to be a lot more fine print about, hey, this is not exclusive, or this is not a robust set of information, that a lot of people skip over. But you're going to have to be a little bit more transparent and open with it. Like, hey, this is not the truth. This is not based off 100% of the population, but this is what we think or what we've extrapolated. But there's going to need to be new regulations around that space too, because there's already tons of research that goes into however many, I forget the exact number, but a high percentage of people don't read policies, they don't read their terms of conditions, they don't read all these things, they glaze over it. And there's some fun studies that are like, basically 94% of people sworn over their firstborn by signing this document, they just kind of glaze over it. And so those sort of things happen all too common, I think. And when it comes to the data collection piece, you have to realize that no matter how much effort I put into collecting the data, ensuring that it's a full data set with all the data points in line, it's never going to be complete. There's always more data, there's more information, there's more people I could talk to, there's more sources that I can collate. And I think this secondary part of that needs to be is communicating that effectively, that this isn't a cohesive, exhaustive list, but more so it's inclusive of what we were able to do, but we're also still building in the external sources that can continue to develop that further. So a lot of it just comes down to communication, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, such good points. And so could you talk through Koru and how you founded it and how it's evolved over time?
Yeah, definitely. Quite an evolution, I'd say, like any startup, I suppose. But Koru itself was founded out of my PhD research, where I was really investigating the relationships between the private sector and the public sector. So simply put, a corporation that operates in this industry, how do you compare that to, say, a nonprofit or a startup that's working with some sort of social impact cause, and find a correlation between the two so you can strengthen the relationship? And so the easy example I like to use, and I use this on sales pitches, if you're a food and beverage company, you shouldn't necessarily be supporting an animal shelter. Although puppies are great, we love to, keep them off the street, there's no strong correlation there. And so my PhD research was essentially investigating the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, everything from no poverty to, the clean air, all those different things from a wide scope, and looking at every single industry and sub-industry, and then creating a widespread key that basically connects them to each other. So if you're a food and beverage company, maybe specifically beverage, you should be supporting, say, water causes or some sort of filtration direction to help manage the resources that are directly affected by your industry and your business. And so what that does is it takes away the, let's check the box, let's donate to a cause or support some nonprofit, but more so makes it an actual business investment that they're looking into. And so that mentality, that thinking, that key that we were able to create became essentially the engine of Koru. So we built out this AI-driven recommendation algorithm that allowed a company to basically just put in their URL, answer a few other different questions, and then we could scrape through all the information on them and say, based off your industry, your sub-industry, your geographic ties, these are areas that you should support. These are creative ideas to actually push forward with them. And these are some predictive analytics that showcase like what can happen if you actually put a lot of efforts into it. And so that in itself evolved considerably over time, where originally we were just a database of matching to, hey, let's like do an analysis on where you are to see like what you should be focusing on. And it eventually became this full engine AI analysis piece that allowed us to construct pretty instantaneous sustainability roadmap. So a company could say, where I am today, where I should be focused, what are my inefficiencies, what are some areas that would improve our sustainability scores and things like that. And then finally, how can I actually find solutions that can actually push forward with these objectives? And the main gist of the company from a very early stage and still today is to kind of fight the common practice of just producing 100 150 page sustainability reports and creating all these giant metrics and frameworks and data sets, but more so just saying, what do you need to focus on? What do you need to improve? And how do you actually create that change? And boil it down to that, make it very simple, not complex, not intimidating, and then start from that process. So through and through, that was the original technology. That's what we were building and crafting out. That was essentially the development over time. And where Koru now sits is we were recently acquired by a group that's pushing forward in the sustainability private equity space. And we are now the fundamental engine to helping their portfolio companies, as well as the clientele of their portfolio companies, recognize the same thing. Where should we focus? What are some of our gaps? And the solutions that we provide are now our portfolio companies that we can put in front of them to actually create that impact and see what they're doing in the space.
You said it pretty well when you said you gave that speech or that pitch. It kind of resonated with me because, I mean, essentially what you were saying is, what you're impacting, you should kind of invest in that and, mitigate some of that impact. And as you were saying it, it kind of was like, man, that's such an easy idea or such a good idea. When I say easy, I mean a concept. Why didn't we all think of that? Why are you investing in puppies when, you have impact on the water treatment? Such a good idea. So let's talk through some of the challenges that you had starting your business, moving it, scaling it in large, and where you are now.
Yeah, so just to kind of maybe touch on that piece right there, we were trying to create something that was very complex before, I think, to a lot of business owners. Sustainability, ESG, social impact. You can call it all these different, I call them buzzwords, because I think they fundamentally mean the same thing. Your business is doing good, more or less. That's what Koru is created to do. That's to help it. But the concept in itself is very complicated. People hear about regulations and disclosures and all these different frameworks and concepts and goals and letters and acronyms, all that come boiled at them. And so a business that has never done anything like this from that perspective thinks it's very overwhelming, and overwhelming often means expensive. And so the backlash that we got right off the bat when entering any sort of company, especially the medium to smaller ones, is we can't afford this. It's too expensive. We don't have the bandwidth. We don't have the skills or things like that. And so sales 100% was the most difficult challenge that we faced, because we had a product that was fairly novel in itself, because the alternative was some solutions that work with data or whatnot, but they didn't actually do the solution based services that we did. But the other alternative was to either hire a professional, put a sustainability role within your company, or pay literally 40, 50, 60 plus $1,000, all the way up to $200, $300,000 to do external sustainability consulting. And what we did from a very early stage is some of our first hires were sustainability consultants that had kind of had a little bit of that background in history, but we're in this, okay, what's next stage, the very innovative mindset. And we basically use their brains, and I always made the joke, and plug that into the platform that we were building. So we created an AI-driven sustainability consultant. And so the biggest difficulty that we faced from time to time was just explaining our process, and what we're actually doing is requires not the long drawn out reporting time from that we're used to, but more so it's like we are offering you a very simple and streamlined solution to what you are either hearing or you soon will be hearing. These pressures regarding sustainability disclosures, whether it's in your supply chain, some of your largest customers or vendors, and we just make it really simple. So I think all in all, putting a new technology on an antiquated field is always going to be an uphill battle. And surely we felt that from day one when we were trying to explain the concept and grow into the company that we eventually became.
Such a good answer. And, I just wanted to make sure you understood. I was trying to explain, you said it in a way that was easy to understand. I didn't mean that the topic was easy in any means.
No worry.
So I do want to expand and ask you, what are the challenge you face with large corporations versus smaller ones, and really getting them on board with a concept like this?
Yeah. So from an early stage, my my cup of tea, the bread and butter that I wanted to really support was the small and medium businesses that don't have the bandwidth, the resources, and the capabilities to do sustainability or social impact work. And how that how it came to that roundabout conclusion was the fact that, there's 15 million small businesses in the US, and look at the number of, multi-billion dollar businesses in the US. It's a much different number. And so if we can affect more businesses on a smaller scale or a larger scale, and just have that small incremental impact, the ramifications is exceptional. The difficulty is we started kind of testing this with a whole bunch of different companies, from publicly traded Fortune 500 companies all the way down to the small brick and mortar mom and pop shops. And what we found was that our solution was actually desired by larger companies in the early stages because it was able to be extremely efficient and basically take a sustainability professional, and they could now, back to our earlier conversation, increase their output by 2 times, 3 times the effect, because we were giving them these analysis that they would previously spend weeks or months actually creating. The issue with those larger companies is that from the early stages, our software was supposed to be affordable and obtainable, and they had basically a long sales cycle, because any large company, when you're going through that process, has. But we had to basically appease multiple different individuals at these companies. So we'd have to go to the sustainability professional, then someone else within their team, and then their finance individual, and then one of their C-suite members, and then someone else, and then maybe some board member. And it was just a lot of jumping through hoops to basically put a very simple technology into the hands of someone that could use it. And so from that stage on, we had a couple of clients that were in that, big whale category. And we came together as a team. We're like, let's not focus on those anymore. We can earn a lot more money, obviously, from those individual sales and confirming those. But the hassle and the headache of getting those customers is one thing, but also the effects and the impact that we can create isn't the same of what we could do if we put that effort into 10 medium businesses and had our technology used by 10 different companies. And so by and far, the large companies, it just, like as expected, the hurdle to get in the door was very difficult, and actually implementing the tech was even more so. But the smaller businesses, certainly the difficulty was that oftentimes these companies, they didn't have a sustainability professional, they didn't have a social impact professional. We were basically on a fool's errand to chase the right individual at a company. And we heard everything from, John in marketing is the one you should talk to, or Susan in sales, or someone in HR, or maybe it was the C-suite. And so the fact that there wasn't a key stakeholder that was championing this work, because there may have not been this work before, that made it kind of difficult to find that actually targeted personality and individual. And from an investment standpoint and from any small business standpoint, you need to have that ICP, that customer persona. And if it doesn't exist within a company, that's, a big problem from the get-go. So definitely large differences between the two companies, definitely use cases between the two that we were able to kind of overcome to some regard. But it was one of those learning processes where we figured out the sweet spot was that middle-sized company that has maybe their first sustainability person, or they're just starting. And so we can target them and then help the work that they're doing overall. But once again, it wasn't an easy process, and it was an ever learning routine too, from that regard, as you could imagine.
Yeah, I can just imagine the bureaucracy in some of these large corporations and how people get lost in turnover. And, one of the questions I wanted to ask is, how do you approach incorporating life cycle assessments into your strategies?
Yeah, so LCAs, life cycle assessments, are one of those things that we hear about all the time, and our company doesn't actually do those, but we have relationships with a couple companies that do, and I think those, for me, they are the carrot or the dagger, if you will, to lock in a big client. Meaning, a lot of these companies, like especially right now, we're working with selling some of the large hotel chains. They need that quantifiable, third-party verified reason and rationale why this solution is going to improve their bottom line, and also improve and help them hit those sustainability or larger environmental targets. And so LCAs in itself are absolutely essential, because you can say this technology is helping with this product, or this mattress, or this light bulb, or whatever it may be, this boiler, and the LCA that's done on it that shows that this is a verified, third-party verified solution that can actually help this, is basically the way to seal the deal. I'm not saying that they're pointless and there's no need to it besides the marketing piece or the sales piece, but I think in this space, one of the complications is knowing which solutions are just kind of the greenwashing ones, which are actually legitimate ones, which are money makers versus which are pure social impact. And LCAs are a way to showcase that on a very highly diligent, research backed way, which is very important, especially when you're selling to larger clients that are looking at bolstering both their bottom line as well as the actual sustainable impact that they're dealing with on a regular basis.
I kind of want to kind of shift the topic a little and see what your ideas are on this. What are your top three, if you have them, top three myths or misinformation out there on your current field?
Ooh, top three. Okay, so first one that comes to mind is that this I might get a tomato thrown at me for this one, but the sea turtles and the plastic straw thing. If you don't drink out of a plastic straw, you're going to save all the sea turtles in the world, and therefore you're going to save the world. So my focus, my work has always been around corporate impact. It's because it's a large scale effort. It's focusing on the big picture, and there's all these crazy stats out there that's, businesses are responsible for 60, 70, 80% of all the CO2 or all the GHG emissions that go out there. And so when you're looking at it from a data perspective, everything on the table, if I, Ricky, as an individual, and you, Jonathan, and 10 million other people stop drinking out of plastic straws, sadly, we are not going to save the world. It requires a lot bigger efforts, a lot more, strict parameters, a lot more changes of processes and flows and technologies in place from these larger corporations who have such a large impact, to the extent where, and I think it was slightly disproven, but there was a article that came out that the 100 companies are responsible for 70% of all GHG emissions. If you break that down, that's remarkable. 100 single companies responsible for 70% of all the emissions out there. And so it's a big game. And at the same time, it's like every plastic bottle you recycle is wonderful. Never stop doing that. Every metal straw you drink out of versus the plastic will be beneficial, but that alone is not going to save the world. So that's number one that comes to mind. Let's see, the second one, and this is another interesting one that I'm looking at specifically from like the investment standpoint, is the disparity and misappropriation of investments, meaning where people in general think all the money needs to go versus where it actually should be going. And there's a great TED talk, I forget the individual's name, but it was talking about essentially how EVs, electric vehicles, are all the buzz right now. So the scooter revolution, the electric cars, the little golf carts, things like that are just taking all these investment dollars, all the public attention, all these different infrastructures that have been in place there. But it's actually a very, very small percentage of what actually needs to be done on the global ecosystem to actually make an impact as far as sustainability goes. And so when you look at the breakdown of how large the pie is of investment from VCs and all this private equity funds going into the EV space versus the actual impact that it is actually creating, it needs to change. And so that's something that our thesis is like basically balancing that out. But I think a lot of people look at the headlines of, what do I see? What do I experience? What do I feel? And that's what is most important. And that's actually not the case at all. Okay. And third here, let's kind of go deeper in the books here. I think that there's something to be said about front facing innovations that needs to be somehow misworked. And so the big myth is like, the things that I can experience and I can deal with, like planting the trees is the thing that saved the world, or the straws, maybe this goes along with that one, is what's going to save the world. But oftentimes I think it's the unsexy things that are able to create the most impact. So let's think about our work right now. We're pushing forward in the hospitality space with a lot of velocity. And so you think about, you have these hotels that are saying, don't throw the towels, don't hang them up if you want to, save them from being washed, or you're putting the plastic bottles in the showers, and that's great and wonderful. But the things that are actually going to create a lot of impact are the low flush toilets that don't use as much water on a regular basis, or sensor technology that goes into the plumbing system so it can detect a leak, or behind the scenes a sensor that picks up how much waste is being thrown out, so you can reduce that before it even gets to the end user. So they're like, I'm not going to take one less muffin, but not putting those muffins out there in the first place may be the answer to the big picture thing. So I think the focus and the myth that goes along with is like, what I can see is the most impactful thing, but you need to kind of step back and say, how did we get here? And if we can kind of remove that lens and kind of like widen the scope a little bit, I think that's where some great results can come. So I hope those three were helpful. That's a good question. It's one that I should think about a little bit more too. But I like the thought process for sure.
I think those were some pretty interesting answers. And what I heard you say is we need to get some more young ladies interested in leaking toilets so they can scream about it.
That is 100%, I think, what we need to do here. If anyone listens to this, please, let me know, and let's shout it from the rooftops.
So, moving back into some of the AI driven questions, how do you balance innovation while being innovative, while also being sustainable and ethical in that consideration?
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a difficult one. And I think every one of my conversations, especially on the sales side of things, kind of pushes those two together. And so depending on the stakeholder that you're talking to, whether it's your developers all the way to an end user of the technology or a portfolio company, they all have a different thought process about their business, what sustainability means, what innovation means. And I think there's so many different thought camps around this concept where innovation is just improving something, innovating, making it a little bit different. Sustainability, and what I think is really interesting, is if you break down the word, which so many people fail to do, sustainability, the ability to make something sustain more, longer, last longer. And that comes down to oftentimes efficiency and effectiveness. You tie that back to innovation, and innovation is oftentimes making something more effective and efficient. How can we create a processor that's stronger, that's faster, that's quicker? How can we create a workflow or a tool that is better at doing something than it was before by reducing the time it takes to do it? And so sustainability and innovation, and maybe to revert the question a little bit, are actually oftentimes the same thing. And so I like to say that we take the thesis of we foster sustainable innovations because oftentimes sustainability is good for business. It means you're using less resources, you're putting your previous workflows back into play, you're using less materials for certain things. All these different innovations are causing you to be more sustainable. So when I have the conversation with people that are like, are you focusing on technological innovations or are you focusing on sustainability? My thesis, if I, Ricky Martin, can leave one lasting thing is this direction, is they're actually closely, if not very, very closely related to each other, where they're interwoven within the same fabric of the same piece of picture here that we're looking at. And that's something that I think is really beneficial to get that aha moment to a lot of business owners, because they see sustainability as like a cost center that's going to require a lot of work, a lot of reporting, a lot of due diligence and things like that. Whereas innovating is oftentimes sustainable. And that's what we're really trying to push forward for. Maybe kind of taking the question and massaging in a slightly different direction there, but it's something that I try to prioritize both collectively. And if something is more heavy on one side versus the other, my role is then how can we kind of level out the playing field and see the avenue in between to make them both kind of front and center from that perspective.
I really gathered that very political answer of they're both one and the same. So
I've been called a politician from that perspective. It's like, saying all those things, not offend anybody or get anybody upset, but you gotta find the middle thread, right, to make everybody happy at the end of the day.
Spoken like a good founder. So no, I really do appreciate the answer, because you did make me think through it in a different perspective, because the way I thought about it was, to innovate, we have to expense energy, we have to create something new, which takes resources and impacts the sustainability. But there's another approach in the sense of, you have something, how do we make it a little bit better and not use those resources, which is kind of one and the same. Your answer is very political, but it's actually very true. And it actually did make me think about it in a different perspective. So I do appreciate it.
Yeah. And if I could elaborate on that a little bit too, there's all sorts of different innovations. Like I had a sub-segment of my research was looking at, radical innovation versus incremental innovation and all these different things. And so if you, Jonathan, are like, I'm going to create a flying car all of a sudden, like it's going to take resources, it's going to take a lot of computing power, a lot of different things to be put into that. Maybe the end goal is that this flying car uses some sort of velocity to charge itself and go from the sun. And like, that's the lens that I'll always put on it. It's like, how can we create this to be a long-term and sustainable innovation, even if it is going in the hole a little bit from a resource exhaustiveness and everything like that. But I think eventually you can come out and have that status quo, but also even excel beyond that. And that's where the technology, I think, is really interesting, because you can find those solutions that that bridge the gap of being like incremental to being a radical innovation, but still have the sustainable lens that you can look through to find that solution there. I'm glad I can provide a little clarity to everyone to think about things. That's a win in my book.
Even in that, you gave me some ideas of, you may have to go inside the negative of your sustainability, but looking at a longer term approach, it may be a net positive in doing that overall. So I think that's a good approach too. So moving into one of the last topics I want to ask you is, so how do you combat some of that negative publicity that people are just tired of hearing it, and I want my plastic straw back?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that I think one of the topics that keeps me up at night, just because of what's happening currently. I mean, this day and age with the political race, the polarization around ESG, the terminology ESG in itself is, if you say it, you're on this side. If you don't say, you're on this side. And to the point where, some of the largest PE firms, like BlackRock, for example, Larry Finks, he came away and was like, I'm not going to use ESG anymore because people are throwing paint at it and are getting so offended by like this camp and that sway. And the conversation that get to this direction of, like, is it really doing this, or you're greenwashing or negatively affecting this or supporting this? I like to just take two steps back and say the fundamental reason that you are pursuing any sort of sustainability, any sort of environmental benefit, ESG, social impact, is to make your business better and to improve the people on the planet that are operating this large ecosystem that we live in. So I like to like really just, say like, let's think about this from a big picture perspective. It's like, do you want to create a better world for your children? Do you want to, like create a better planet for everyone that lives there? And not to sound cliche, but those things all have tremendous impact when you actually really think about it. And so putting the terminology aside, putting the buzzwords aside, my work is about helping businesses be better, period, end of the day. And so sustainable innovation, sustainability, all these different terms are just used as weapons oftentimes and thrown around out there. And that fatigue is real. People are tired of hearing all these disclosure updates and all these policies that are coming out and all these different things. And so I'm going to say, let's silence that all and just think about your business, your unique assets, your resources, your employees, what you guys really care about and what's really aligned with your business, and just focus on that. Don't worry about the large, lofty, huge, long goals in the scope 2, 3, and whatever else is going to come in the future, but just do what your business can do and try to improve it a little bit. At the end of the day, it's going to make your business stronger. It's going to increase your customer retention. You're going to get new audiences. Your employees are going to be happy because they're working for a bigger picture, a larger cause. And it's going to avoid that, oh my gosh, we have to report again, we have to disclose again, we have to update, we have to lobby, we have to do all these different things, because it is exhausting. And that's not going to go away. As long as there's people, there's going to be arguments. As long as there's arguments, there's going to be people that are going against the thing. But if I were to be able to make one change, it's that sustainability and social enterprises is the future. I think it's creating a business that isn't known as a social impact business or a social enterprise. It's just an enterprise. It's just a business, because it needs to be so inherently coded into the fundamental foundation of a business. And I think that's where we're going. I'm hopeful that's where we're going. The way that the newer generations are putting that pressure on there, it's fighting that fatigue. It's getting over the hurdle to say, like, this is more important than, that short-term quarterly profits, or, proving that this politician's right and that politician's not. But more so, it's just the right thing to do. And it's better for the business and the world at large. So really relying on the fundamentals first, and pushing out that message and ensuring that you just keep pushing forward. And sometimes you have to fight a little bit of fatigue to get over the hump, I'm sure, as you're aware. And I think that's important to kind of just help you get out of bed and put foot first, day after day.
I do want to thank you for what you're doing. I think it's very noble, and I think it's very needed. With some of the historical, I'm big into history, and so some of the historical books I've read into corporations and how they abuse the environment. So, what you do is very needed. So I do think what you're doing is very noble, and I appreciate everything you're doing. And so I lead that into the question of, what are you working on now, and where are you going in the future with your company?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll thank you for those kind words, Jonathan. And it really means a lot to hear that there's more support nowadays, I think, than ever before. There's more people pushing forward with this sort of work than ever before, and there's a lot of funding for it, but also efforts and initiatives that are really like trying to create this global ecosystem. So I consider myself just another individual kind of pushing forward and trying to develop. And I hope if I can, convince one person that maybe this is a career change they want to do or something they want to explore within their business, that to myself is a massive win. So thank you for that. As far as our business, we are probably in the most exciting stage of my entire professional career. We were recently acquired by this private equity firm. It's called Open Access Ventures. We're actually rebranding the total website. I'm not sure where this podcast can come live, but it's hopefully going up next week. And so openaccess.ventures is where you can find more information about myself and the thesis that we're pushing forward. And Koru in itself is part of the engine that's helping, like I mentioned, our portfolio companies and their potential clientele as well. And so the future of our company is really just flushing out that analysis piece and ensuring that we're supporting new age companies from not only a technology sustainable objective, but also now a funding perspective, a partnership perspective, and all of that combined into that larger ecosystem. So I fully urge any of your listeners or viewers or anyone that comes in your network, I'm always happy to have these conversations and ask questions and support businesses, in any way, shape, or form. And you can find my contact information on that website, as well as just Ricky at openaccess.ventures can contact me as well. So I'm always keen to discuss this further. It's one of those things that I'm very passionate about, but also I think there's a lot of potential and excitement in the space. And if I could be on the wave in the forefront and help push that forward in any way, then, I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen.
Again, I want to thank you one more time for coming on. And, you can really see the passion when you speak, because there's certain words and there's certain topics that you start smiling about. And, some people don't notice those things, but I can tell when you start talking about certain topics, you do have a smile on your face. So you can see the passion in your face. You can see the passion in what you do. So I do appreciate it. And thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, Jonathan, this was incredible. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to keeping in touch with you as well and seeing what you accomplish in the near future here too. So thanks again. Appreciate it.